Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Jiten Vasist from Department of Biotechnology and Bioinformatics, JP University of Information Technology, Himachal Pradesh. Today I am going to talk about a module that's central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. This module is placed in paper membrane biophysics. The present module primarily focuses on the nervous system and its basic components and their precise function in coordination of the body. Therefore, following objectives are being prepared. Number 1, introduction and role of the nervous system. Number 2, differentiation of central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Number 3, central nervous system and its role in maintaining homeostasis in the body. And lastly, the peripheral nervous system and its different kinds of pathways and their functions. Nervous system is basically composed of complex network of billions of nerve cells associated together in a highly coordinated fashion to form quick control center of the body. Nervous system is important in maintaining homeostasis of the human body. Series of sensory receptors work with nervous system to provide information about the changes in both internal and external nervous system. If you see that there are 3 types of functions which are being carried by a nervous system, basically the sensation, their integration and the reactions. And for that matter, for sensation it requires the changes occurring outside the body which are known as the stimuli. Then for the integration, processing and interpretation of sensory information, and lastly the reaction occur with the help of activation of muscles or glands. The nervous system acts as integrating center for getting the information through our senses, processing them and trigger responses. For example, if we accidentally touch a hot plate, immediately our reflex action makes our hand to pull in seconds. It is only because of our nervous system in which nerve cells immediately send signals to our brain and feel pain and hence pull back our hand. If you talk about human nervous system, it is consists of 2 major parts. One is central nervous system and number 2 the peripheral nervous system. In central nervous system, brain and spinal cord are the primary center for central nervous system. If you see in the figure, it is a pink color figure shows the central nervous system which is consisting of brain and spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system is made up of ganglia and nerves which are connected to each other as well as to the brain and spinal cord. If you see in the figure, the blue color is showing the peripheral nervous system. The coordination of both central nervous system and peripheral nervous system allow human beings to make equilibrium within their internal system and as well as the external environment. Central nervous system and peripheral nervous system work together to integrate and coordinate the motor information for controlling other body tissues. If you see the flow chart in which the major divisions of nervous system are seen, the number 1 it is a central nervous system and number 2 it is a peripheral nervous system. We will go into details of both of the system, but before that we are just summarizing the whole system, how it is processing the information. Central nervous system is composed of spinal cord and the brain. The brain can be further divided into forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. The forebrain can be divided into cerebellum, thalamus, hypothalamus region, while the midbrain is a tectum and tegmentum, while the hindbrain has cerebellum, pons and medulla oblongata. Now shift towards the another side which will go into details, that is peripheral nervous system, which has autonomic nervous system and somatic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system can be further divided into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. Central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord. It functions to integrate information and coordinate majority of physiological activities in bilaterally symmetric animals. Several sensory systems like retina, optic nerves, the olfactory nerves and the olfactory epithelium are also considered as components of central nervous system because of their direct synapsing with the brain without any intermediate ganglia. The part of central nervous system within brain lies in a cranial cavity. The spinal cord component of central nervous system is protected and enveloped by the vertebrae, and both brain and spinal cord are also enveloped within the meninges. The brain and the spinal cord are surrounded by cerebrospinal fluid which circulates within the ventricles cavities of central nervous system. Now, we will start from central nervous system, and this you will find the brain is a major component of a central nervous system. Brain is a structure that processes information, and it is composed of interconnected neurons and glial cells. It functions to integrate the major sensory information and coordinate function consciously and unconsciously. Their different parts of brain also control complex functions such as thinking, feeling and regulation of homeostasis. It is estimated that the human brain is the largest brain, basically approximately 1.5 kilogram, which is about 2% of the human's body weight among all vertebrates relative to their body sizes. The brain of a vertebrate is enclosed in a protective skeletal framework which is made up of bones or cartilage. And if you see the brain structure, you will find it has three major components. One is cerebellum, another is cerebellum, and lastly the brain stem, as you see in the figure. During development, human brain is built up from three fluid filled sections, which were forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Cerebellum developed from forebrain, brain stem from midbrain, and cerebellum and the parts of brain stems developed from hindbrain region. First, we talk about the cerebellum. It is the largest part of the brain and makes up approximately 85% of total brain weight. It is located above the cerebellum, as you see in the figure. It contains two hemispheres with an outer portion called the cerebral cortex. This region controls the voluntary actions, speech, memory and thought processes. This region consists of two hemispheres which end in the brain stem, and behind sits cerebellum. Cerebral cortex is the outermost covering of the cerebellum, which is further classified into four lobes. Number one, parietal lobe, second is frontal lobe, third is temporal lobe and fourth one is the occipital lobe. If you talk about frontal lobe, it is located at the front of the brain over the eyes. It contains the olfactory bulb which processes smell. The frontal lobe also contains the motor cortex, which is important for planning and implementing movement. Neurons in the frontal lobe also control cognitive functions like maintaining attention, speech, decision making, and parts of this area are also involved in personality, socialization and accessing risks. The second portion we call as a parietal lobe. As you see in the inset figure, it is located at the top of the brain. Neurons in the parietal lobe are involved in speech and reading. Two of the parietal lobes main functions are processing and somatosensation, or the touch sensations like pressure, pain, heat, cold. The senses of how parts of the body are oriented in space is also related with the parietal lobe. The third portion we call is the occipital lobe, and it is located at the back of the brain, as you see in the figure, which is an insert figure. It is primarily involved in vision, sensing, recognizing and identifying the visual world. Sensory neurons transmit information from the eyes at the front of the skull to the occipital lobe at the back of the brain via occipital nerves. The last portion we call it as a temporal lobe, which is located at the base of the brain by your eyes and is primarily involved in the processing and interpreting sounds. It also contains the hippocampal region, a structure that processes memory formation and critical for learning. Now we talk about the brain stem, which has a function to transmit information between the brain and the other parts of the body. It contains three regions: midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata. Midbrain is responsible for visual reflexes. Pons control certain respiratory functions, while medulla oblongata having centers that regulate heart and lung. As you see in the figure, it is clearly shows as a blackish region for the brain stem. Thalamus and hypothalamus lies between cerebellum part and the brain stem part. Hypothalamus is a seat for hormone production following signal from pituitary gland. It works as a link between endocrine and nervous system. Thalamus function to control consciousness, perception and sleep. It broadcasts sensory and motor signals to the cerebellum. Now the last part is what we call it as a cerebellum. It is located underneath of the cerebellum. If you see in the figure, it is clearly seen that the cerebellum is a lower part than the cerebellum. It coordinates mucoskeletal movement to maintain posture, balance and muscle tone. Although cerebellum constitutes only of 10% of human brain, but it is involved in maintaining balance, posture, reflexes, sequence learning, time and motor learning. The spinal cord is a thick bundle of nerve tissues that carries information about the body to the brain and from the brain to the body. It accents the medulla oblongata of brain to the area around first lumbar vertebrae in lower back. It is protected by three layers of membrane that are vertebral column, number 2 the cerebellar spinal fluid and third the meninges, which are the three layers of membrane around brain and the spinal cord. The spinal cord is contained within the bones of the vertebrae column, but is able to communicate signals to and from the body through its connections via spinal nerves. Nerves from the peripheral nervous system extend out of the spinal cord. In the figure, you will find a cross-sectional area of a spinal cord looks like a white oval containing a gray butterfly shape. The information get relayed to and from the spinal canal is directional. Axons and cell bodies in the dorsal spinal cord convey most sensory information from the body to the spinal cord, then brain. Axons in the cell bodies in the ventral spinal cord primarily transmit signals they controlling movement from the brain to out of the body. Now, when we talk about cells of the central nervous system, the first primary cells are the neurons, and neurons are the basic functional unit of the nervous system. The neurons have three structures. One is the cell body, another is the axon, and lastly the dendrite. Cell body is mainly processing center of the neuron. Dendrites are the branching extensions that conduct nerve impulse towards the cell body, and axons conducts nerve impulses away from the cell body. We will get a myelinated axons which are made up of a myelinated sheet, and they make white matter, while the neuron and glial cell bodies make the grey matter. Grey matter is also composed of interneurons which connects two neurons each located in the different parts of the body. When we talk about neurons, then the another thing is we have the neuroglia or glial cells, which are non-neural cells which provide physical protection to the neurons in the central nervous system as well as in the peripheral nervous system also. These cells are required to form a myelin sheet. In general, there are following functions of the glial cells. Number 1, they surround and protect the neurons. Number 2, they supply the nutrient material and oxygen to the neurons. Number 3, insulation of the neurons for better conductivity is done by these glial cells. Number 4, they are required to remove the dead neurons and protection from the pathogens. And these glial cells are of different forms like astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglial and epidermal cells. Astrocytes are the type of glial cells which primarily support cells of the brain and spinal cord. These are required to synthesize and secretion of proteins that we call neurotrophic factors, and also important for the clearance of proteins or chemicals or neurotransmitters which might be harmful to neurons when they are in excess. For example, glutamate, a neurotransmitter that in excess cause cells to become overexcited and leading to cell death, and this can be cleared with the help of astrocytes. Now we talk about the second cells, that we have the oligodendrocytes. They secrete a lipid rich myelin sheet which wrap around the axons in neurons, and this process we call as a myelination. Axon fibers insulated by myelin can carry action potential at a speed of 100 meter per second, whereas without myelin they only can carry action potential at a very slow speed, that is near about 1 meter per second. The high speed of action potential in myelinated axon is due to the phenomena that we call the saltatory conduction, in which every time action potential gets some threshold and it will go to the longer ways. When you talk about microglial cells, these are specialized immune cells for the brain, and they function as antigen presenting monocytes. These cells are metabolically stable and evenly present in gray and white matter of brain. They migrate to the site of injury to assist removal of dead and dying cells. Microglial cells can also secrete cytokines that activate cells of the immune system to respond to the injury sites. Lastly, we have the fourth type of cell that we call epidermal cells. These ependymal cells are basically line the spinal cord and the ventricular system of the brain. These cells are required for formation as well as secretion of cerebrospinal fluid, that is the CSF. These cells have a continuous layer of single cuboidal or chromal cells with cilia, which beat and help to circulate the CSF and make up the blood CSF barrier. Now, we talk about peripheral nervous system. As the central nervous system acts like the power plant of the nervous system, creates the signal that controls the function of the body, the PNS is like the wires which connect signals to individual houses. It means what? Which is essential to process the signals produced by CNS to reach and control the body. The peripheral nervous system is composed of the cranial and spinal nerves and can be divided into different divisions based on the structure and functions. You will find that the efferent or sensory division made up of cranial and spinal nerves that contain sensory neurons. Sensory neurons transmit sensory information from the skin, skeletal muscles and sensory organs to the central nervous system. And the second division we have the efferent or the motor division. It is also made up of cranial and spinal nerves that contain motor neurons. Motor neurons transmit messages about desired movement from the central nervous system to the muscles to make them contract. Motor neurons may be under conscious and unconscious control. If you see that we have three types of neurons, which are efferent neurons, which are called as the motor neurons, efferent neurons, which are called sensory neurons, and third one is the interneurons. Efferent neurons convey information from the central nervous system to the muscles and glands. Efferent neurons, they carry information from sensory receptors to the central nervous system, while in case of interneurons, they carry and process the sensory information. The efferent divisions can be further divided into somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic or conscious control nervous system, it sends motor commands from the central nervous system to voluntary control muscles. It is made up of cranial and spinal nerves that contains motor neurons under conscious control. Without the somatic nervous system, an animal would be unable to respond its environment via controlled motor movements. Motor neurons of the somatic nervous system synapse with the muscles under voluntary control, such as limb muscles. When you talk about the second division of efferent division, that is autonomic or unconscious control nervous system, which controls bodily functions without conscious control, such as heart, smooth muscles and exocrine or endocrine glands. These can be further divided into two systems with of opposing effect. One is the sympathetic nervous system and another is the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system controls the flight or fight reactions associated with the short term stress responses. For example, functions controlled by the sympathetic nervous system include an accelerated heart rate and inhibited digestion, while parasympathetic nervous system controls the rest and digest activity involved in conserving and restoring energy. The parasympathetic nervous system resets organ functions after the sympathetic nervous system is activated. Effect of the parasympathetic nervous system on the target organs include slowing of heart rate, lowered blood pressure and stimulation of digestion. The analogy of these two systems is a seesaw where they both are in motion, but one is usually higher or more activated than the other, and they are inversely proportional to each other. As both systems control different internal systems, when sympathetic system is active, the parasympathetic will be inactive. The analogy of the two stress systems is a seesaw where they both are in motion, but one is more active and another is less active. For example, during stress or danger, sympathetic nervous system is responsible for release of epinephrine that results in the increased metabolic rates and activities of muscle tissues. Parasympathetic nervous system lowers the metabolic rate and hence responsible for rest and digestion. Secondly, if you see that during heavy exercise or hard work, the sympathetic systems get activated and it results in the inactivation of parasympathetic system. Therefore, the conditions like rest and digestion get stopped. Now, we will just differentiate between central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. If you see that the central nervous system is comprised of brain and spinal cord, while peripheral nervous system, it comprises of somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. In case of central nervous system, it processes the information which is carried by peripheral nervous system from different sensory receptors, while peripheral nervous system have nerves which leave the brain and spinal cord toward different body parts. It has two main divisions, motor and sensory. Sensory collect the information and motor relays the process information by central nervous system. Central nervous system is protected by blood-brain barrier and cavities, while in case of peripheral nervous system, it is not protected by any kind of covering or barrier. Because of this, you will find there is a less injury in central nervous system. However, the damage to the central nervous system can lead to the global damage, while in case of peripheral nervous system, they are more prone for injury. However, it can lead to the localized functional loss. Central nervous system communicates all sorts of involuntary information, while in case of peripheral nervous system, it communicates both information for the voluntary and the involuntary formations. Central nervous system plays no role in regulation of blood pressure, thirst or body temperature, while in case of peripheral nervous system, it is regulating the blood pressure, thirst and body temperature. So, students, let us now summarize what we have learned from this module. The nervous system in humans is a complex integration of organs like brain, spinal cord and sensory organs along with nerves. Nerve cells are required for exchange of information between brain and spinal cord to rest of the body parts for coordinated control. In vertebrates, nervous system consists of two major parts, A, the central nervous system and the B, the peripheral nervous system. The coordination of both central nervous system and peripheral nervous system allow human beings to make equilibrium within their internal system as well as the external environment. Central nervous system functions to integrate information and coordinate majority of physiological activities in bilaterally symmetric animals. The brain and spinal cord are two major components of central nervous system and these coordinately control the process information. The brain of vertebrates is enclosed in a skeletal framework which is made up of bones or cartilage, and human brain is the largest organ among all other animals. The brain has three components, namely cerebellum, cerebellum and brainstem. During development, human brain is built from three fluid-filled sections which were forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Cerebellum developed from forebrain, brainstem from midbrain and cerebellum, and other parts of the brainstem developed from hindbrain. Cerebellum is the largest part of the brain and it makes approximately 85% of the brain's weight, and this region controls voluntary actions, speech, memory and thought process. The cerebellum is associated with the balance and coordination and is also thought to be involved in cognitive functions. While brainstem connects to the spinal cord, it functions to transmit information between brain and other parts of the body. Lastly, the spinal cord serves as a medium for signals to connect the brain and the rest of the organs. If you talk about the cells, the neuron cells are the key players for sensing and transmitting signals in between target tissue and CNS, that is the central nervous system, to control all voluntary and involuntary functions of the body. Neurons interact with one another to pass information in the brain and the spinal cord. Neurons working together as a network to make decisions, control emotions or feel sensation. The second cells other than the neurons are glial cells, which are non-neural cells which provide a physical protection to neurons in the central nervous system as well as in the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is the second part of the nervous system which is made up of nerves and ganglia radiating outside of the brain and its spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system has two types of nerve fibers. Number one, efferent fibers which transmit impulses from tissues or organs to the central nervous system called sensory division. Number two, efferent fibers that transmit regulatory impulses from central nervous system to peripheral organs called motor division. Somatic nervous system is under voluntary control and composed of all cranial nerves except for optic nerves along with retina, while autonomic nervous system regulates involuntary actions related to smooth muscles and glands. Sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are commonly exclusive but both are negatively associated and function in a symbiotic fashion.